Awesome. Well, seems like people are already coming in. Welcome, everyone. We are going to start in a couple of minutes, but in the Zoom chat, we'd love to know where you're tuning in from and maybe what you're looking forward to seeing and learning about the webinar. Looks like someone from Dallas, San Francisco, Colombia, San Mateo, London. Oh, cool. Thanks for joining us at the tail end of your day. Appreciate that, Christina. Poland, New Jersey. Cool. Well, folks are all over. Looks like people are still trickling in, but we can go ahead and get started. So today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Elliot from Skydio, and we're going to be talking about how Skydio scaled coding agents on a million line monorepo. So this is something I'm really excited about. Elliot, you and I have chatted about this quite a bit, kind of offline and kind of how you're doing it. This is a really inspiring story to me too, and I want to talk about that as well. But yeah, let's get an introduction. So Elliot would love to know a little bit about you for the audience.
Yeah. So, hey, everybody. I'm Elliot. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering over here at Skydio. Skydio is builds a drone platform where you have docks and drones around the world. And from a cloud platform, you can launch them on missions. It's used for emergency services, fire departments, police departments, all for trying to help make the world a better and safer place. And there's a huge corpus of code between the code that's on the vehicle, the code that's on mobile controllers, the code that's in docking stations, and then the code that's in the cloud. And they're all in one giant, super easy to use, perfect monorepo. Hint, hint.
Cool. Well, it's a pleasure to have you. I'll introduce myself too for those who aren't familiar. My name is Ben. I'm the VP of Product at Coder. I've been at Coder for 5 years, and this isn't a Coder pitch, but Coder's job is to move software development off of laptops into a cloud, whether it's the organization's own data center, on-prem, or a public cloud, to kind of centralize and standardize the way software development is done in the organization. So, Elliot, it's great to have you. As I've mentioned, hearing kind of your story and your transformation has been really inspiring to me. But I think like for the audience, it'd be really helpful. Can you walk us through kind of what you do at Skydio and what led you all to using Coder and remote environments?
Yeah, so I run a bunch of different teams here. I run the developer productivity team and the infrastructure team, as well as some of the cloud product teams. But in particular, the desire to move to remote development environments really came from the developer productivity side of the house. So we were kind of faced with the inevitable problem, which is in a monorepo that has been around for 10 years, it is very large. There's a lot of custom setup steps. There's a lot of things. And a lot of people who are well established here, who already had a physical desktop, who had tweaked it the way that they've wanted to have tweaked, had a working system. And new people coming in would spend, my onboarding time was about 3 weeks to go from nothing to having the code all working. I ran
Three
into probably
weeks.
every rake you could step on, I happened to step on. And it was just, yeah, I was like, okay, job number one, make this thing go away. And like to me, one of the core values of Coder for sure is that ability to spend the time up front to engineer up what a clean development environment should look like, such that you can eliminate that ongoing support pain. We don't ban anyone here from using desktops, but on day one, you are writing code and merging code on day one. And I think like the first in your first week at a new job is when you're the most scared, you're the most nervous. Like, do I have what
Yeah.
it takes to make a big difference here? And then you start, and every single rake you step on makes you go like, man, everyone thinks I'm an idiot, as opposed to like on day one, I wrote merged code. I can do this. And I feel like you need that boost to like really make you feel welcome in a new company and set things off on a good pace, because first impressions mean a lot.
Yeah, yeah. You've talked a lot about like the kind of first impressions of someone joining. I'm curious for those who have already been at Skydio for a while, who are very used to their setup they have on the desktop. What was that cultural transition like, telling them that it's fine, we're not ripping you off of the desktop, but there's
Yeah.
another environment out there for you.
Yeah, and just to be clear, each company's at their own place. There are plenty of companies, I could think of an Anduril or a bank, where the answer is you need to kind of set a standard for the extreme
Yeah.
security reasons and the intellectual property you're trying to protect. And the right answer is to more of use a stick rather than a carrot. Terrible metaphor because carrots are awful. But like conceptually, for our developers here, we went the carrot approach, which was like, what's a problem you have today that we can help make better? And at the time, for those developers, it was when swapping between making patch fixes to much older versions of the vehicle versus the current version, it could destroy your environment. Now, in a perfect world, and we have gotten way closer to that, to have a hermetic environment where everything's all pre-configured, that shouldn't be a problem. But I don't know if anyone on this call has a perfect code base, but good for you. We don't. So there are consequences to that checkout. So being able to say, oh yeah, in Coder, you could just get an environment going up in Coder, leave your desktop the way it is, and it's an extension of your workflow. So you can just set up an environment, make a patch, submit the patch, destroy the environment, which is something only the cloud can do. And by saying you don't have to lose your desktop, it was like, oh, this is a net value add. And then over time, one of the key design decisions we made with our Coder rollout was the workstations are built from the build nodes themselves. So there's kind
Mm-hmm.
of this nice guarantee that every 4 hours you get a new Coder environment that literally is a working build node. So there is no chance it didn't build correctly. So people over time began well, Coder doesn't break. It just always works. And my desktop keeps breaking. And the dev team keeps going, I don't know what you did to your desktop, but it does work on Coder. And over time, we saw a pretty big shift of people that are like, the developers that are like, I just want it to work.
Yeah, and for those unfamiliar, when you say build node, is this essentially the environment that you're using for things like CI and making artifacts
Oh,
and stuff? Or
exactly. Yeah. So we took a basically build kite. We took a build kite worker and say, all right, well, this is the build kite worker that builds the product and creates the final firmware that goes on the drone that goes flies the
yeah,
drone. So let's go build that firmware. And instead of saving the firmware and throwing the build node away, we throw the firmware away and we save the build node and put the build node in the system. So then when the developer gets a new workstation, I can say that will definitely build the firmware because you wouldn't have gotten the machine if it couldn't have gotten to that phase, which is a
yeah,
really cool, like interesting step for stability. And then we layer in like VS Code and all the other
yeah.
things that you need on top of it to make it
And I
like an
think that would
actual
also
phone.
avoid scenarios where a developer maybe gets something that builds on their local machine, then they push it to CI and something breaks as well, right? Because you have the same environments, I suppose, in both places.
Correct. And again, there's worlds where obviously there are some people here that dev containers and they're like, well, I've solved that problem because I have this great dev container. And that's awesome. And
Yeah,
that's not the reason why you should specifically use Coder. For us, that was like the major impetus though, was that we the dreams of what an ideal environment would look like in the future wasn't something I was willing to wait a year for. There was a lot of people that were like, well, eventually, if we get a fully hermetic basal build, this problem goes away. And it's like, yeah, but I kind of want something today. So Coder
yeah.
was our like, we could immediately, and within a weekend, we had it running. Within the first week, we had developers on it.
Yeah, yeah, and, and Matthew had a comment which I agree with. I love the reverse of roles here. It worked on Coder, not my machine. And yeah, for those tuning in, please use the Zoom chat. We also have a Q&A section. We will have plenty of time to get to questions at the end too. So if you're curious or have a different experience, we'd love to hear from you in the Zoom chat. We have I think over 50, 60 people watching right now, so it would love to hear from you live. Cool. So on to kind of Skydio's tech stack and what it actually looks like. You mentioned that you are using build nodes as kind of the core infrastructure. What does the tech stack overall kind of look like?
Yeah,
You've hinted at it a little bit. What kind of decisions did you make? What cloud provider are you using? Are you using Kubernetes? What other technology are you using as part of your dev environments?
we're a full stack drone and hardware company. So that means we've got everything from kernel developers, C++ development, and Python development, and I think Kotlin development for the drone and physical controller pieces that we have. So that lives in the Monorepo and has to work on top of Coder. We also have a very large cloud product that's Kubernetes based in AWS. All the standard like RDS, the Elastic caches, the S3, all the standard like cloud components there. Um, so we deployed Coder. We had a choice between deploying it in our on-prem data center and cloud. Cloud made a lot of sense because that brings with it the primitives that match. So that's what's in production anyway. So if you're launching up a local cloud development stack, you can boot that up and you can easily extend from your Coder workstation into the local EKS cluster to like get extra GPU if that's what you need and things like that.
Cool. And we designed kind of Coder with this kind of flexibility in mind where you can bring in any kind of infrastructure. How are you kind of extending the concept of coders like Terraform based templates to give developers the optionality they need inside of their environments?
Yeah, so we started. I wanted to create an environment at Skydio where you could treat your coder workspace as so ephemeral, and this will play into AI later. You could treat your environment as so ephemeral on a per pull request basis. You could create a coder workstation for that pull request, shut down
Wow.
that machine, and start up the machine for the next pull request. And if you did it aggressively like that, and you're constantly rotating, I could set a culture where we're not going to maintain your old instances, always keep moving forward. So the challenge I kind of set for myself was how do you boot a coder machine within a minute so that it's not a blocker for your day? And then how does that come with everything that you need? So we did a heavy dot files integration using Chamoy. Uh, Probably pronounced it wrong, but who cares? So that people could have their own customized experience on every single node that they went to. That got widely adopted, and we put a lot of time into thinking what are all the different shell scripts and helpers and tooling it could take so you could go from nothing to something. And by deploying it through Coder, we were able to get a lot of like pain points where people were like, oh, there's some archaic command I use for something. And we're like, great, I'll make that an alias for your group or your department. And there's some really good features inside of Coder for being able to, if you take a group of people, you could assign them to have different behavior on the same node than a different group of people, which allows you to start to say, like, well, I have a GPU heavy group, they should get different instance types or things
Right.
like that. So we did a heavy dot files integration. We did a heavy integration with AWS Secret Manager. Um, and this is where it just small things like, oh, you need credentials, but I'm not going to put the credentials in source control. I'm not going to put them in some janky, weird system. So I'm just going to put them in AWS Secret Manager where they are secured. And then on your instance, I can use your instance profile, which would be specific to your user, to then also check out the secrets that are specific to your user. And it was like a really cool way to just get people seamless secrets. Most people at Skydio don't even realize that's how we built the automation because from their perspective, the thing just works.
It
And
just works. Yeah.
I'm a believer in that balance between some people are very usually it's very ivory tower dev prod people that are against the idea of any magic at all. But I feel like software engineering is complicated enough that it's just not reasonable to expect that everybody learns the customer's voice, does product management, design management, feature management, coding, keeps up to date on technology. Like there's so much shit you got to do, to be honest, to be an effective developer. That then saying you also need to know the intricacies of Bazel or whatever build system you have. You need to know the ins and outs. To me, just doesn't feel reasonable. It's just one more thing you have to learn. So I kind of like hiding where possible and stable complexity that doesn't make you a better engineer. So auto injection of secrets is a good example of something that's toil that nobody actually is better off not having.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like consistent build is another one, right? Like having to debug why a build isn't working when it just
Yeah.
should. Yeah. There's one question actually, which I think we can take before we get into the AI stuff, which is when you talk about creating coder off of the latest build node, does that mean the latest code base as well, out of Git or wherever your provider is?
Yeah, so it's kind of a cool idea with monorepos that there is one source of truth. So yeah, so it's actually take the latest cut of our code base, run all the tests against it, build all the possible things, prove that that node definitely works the way it is, remove all the artifacts from the system that are the result of building that the person might not want yet,
Yeah,
keep its Bazel cache, keep some of those things alive, save it as an AMI, save a caching node. We do a split where we like save the AMI and then save the caches as like little bundles that are paired, so you can download them on boot and unpack your stuff. But yeah, so we set up like an environment like that, and then when your coder instance boots up, you've got a little bit of time spending refreshing the disk, but otherwise you're off to the races. I've timed
cool.
it from nothing to the product fully running and working in its full stack environment was 6 minutes and 30 seconds from literally zero to I have my IDE and a running dev server, and I'm ready to write my first line of code. And 6 minutes and
Yeah.
30 seconds feels like a reasonable price to pay for a new pull request.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean that's really impressive when you think of it being a massive monorepo, a virtual machine being spun up, and this monorepo is being updated quite frequently too. So you know, even if you had something a week old, in a lot of cases stuff would break. So having to keep that up to date and what's the word? I mean, anyway, just keeping that up to date is really impressive. You know, problem that you've solved. So now I kind of want to get into AI. I think a lot of different folks have had their own, you know, experiences with AI where they start as a skeptic, start to use it more, and have either an aha moment or begin to kind of realize how it was useful. So I'm really curious from your perspective, what was your first impression of using AI as part of kind of doing your job as a platform engineer or an engineer and a leader? And then what was kind of the tipping point where you went from skeptical into, okay, this is something that we can operationalize?
So I'm not a technologist from the perspective of like, I'm skeptical when anyone pushes me a new technology. I have a very strong SRE background. I'm on every single page of every single outage. That's what I do. So therefore,
Yeah,
every time someone introduces the new technology that solves all my problems, I'm like, okay, well, here's another 4 or 5 2 a.m. calls until it gets stable. So I'm not someone that rushes into it, but I got lucky on this one back in 2023, pretty early on into OpenAI. Um, uh, I was working internally on the idea of building integrations between our platform and other platforms. We were looking at different vendors that could perform these integrations, and ChatGPT had just come out. And I was like, all right, I'm going to make it a challenge to myself to have ChatGPT in 2023 build end-to-end integrations across two different applications. It was like, give me an AWS to my application integration, and just chatting. And what I'd say is print the code on the screen. So nobody had a coding agent that I'm aware of at this time.
yeah,
But I just said, ChatGPT, give me the code, and I would copy paste it. And I made it a rule that I wasn't allowed to touch the code at all. I had to only copy paste it back into my IDE, and it was a little painful, but it worked. But what was incredible then was I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Maybe this will go somewhere someday. But then I told it, I want you to rewrite this entire thing to be Azure based. That it got on nearly the first try. I saved all my prompts and it was like, yep, nearly the first try. It converted to Azure and converted to GCP. Then I asked it to convert from Python to Go. On the first try, it worked. And I was like, okay, interesting. Like there are some things that AI isn't doing so well. My ability to translate something from one programming language to another is not a trivial task I could possibly do. And I started thinking about kind of like language translators for humans, this idea of um, someone who can translate English to Spanish. Either Spanish and English or you don't. But if you have
yeah.
this gap between these two things and you're like, I want to communicate to someone in Spanish, if you don't have a translator, you're in trouble. And I was like, oh, wow, GPT just did something amazing for me. I wonder where this is going to go. I wrote some articles on it that got really popular. And I was like, I'm kind of a believer in, at that point, I was like, this is clearly a transformational technology. Give it enough time, and this will turn into something that someone's going to productize, and I'm just going to be able to download, use, and it be really powerful. So I kind of had a starting ground there. So I was a believer back from 23. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually relatively early, and I think it's cool that I did the same thing. I would ask not the same thing, but I would ask ChatGPT things. I would copy and paste it, putting a coding error. I'd run into an error. I'd go back and give it the error, and it's really fascinating. Then realizing what it can do, and then yeah, I mean, and you're talking about it's only a matter of time before things are productized. Now we have IDEs and agents and a bunch of tools out there. Coder having some of them, and you wrote a blog post called "Agentic AI has changed my career," and I don't want to spoil the blog post, but and I think everyone here should read it because it was really inspiring to me, and it really changed the way that I think about what I can do as a technical leader. Who's not coding every day, but I'm curious as kind of more tools were coming out. How did this change your workflow, and how are you able to actually operationalize this as someone who wasn't writing code every day?
yeah. So for background for me, I started off as a software engineer, like a lot of people do, and then I ventured into other areas. I became a manager super early, and I had a bad elbow injury from powerlifting ages ago, so I couldn't type on a computer. So I led mostly through meetings and designs and discussions, and I
Yeah,
lost that coding stuff early on, and I ended up in this state of like I accrued a ton of knowledge about infrastructure and security. I became a FedRAMP architect. So I was like, okay, I have a value add here because I have 15 years worth of knowledge and a really good memory for all this infrastructure stuff that people don't know. And it's something I could be very helpful with. But coding is something I sit down to code and I'm like, I remember the fundamentals, but I don't know this language. I don't know the libraries. And I always felt like I was working through other people. I was always self-conscious internally, like feeling like, man, I wish I could just do this. I see other people just do this. I can't. I just I go to sit down and try to move a button around, and I'm like, I just don't specifically know what
yeah,
garbage TypeScript needs. Like, and that was
yeah.
like stressful. And so when the agentic AI stuff started coming out, I was slow to the punch on this one. I was kind of waiting for everybody else to settle on Windsurf versus Cursor versus Claude, and everyone was kind of struggling to get value out of it. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna pick one. I'm gonna make this work. And so we ended up picking with Windsurf. On the right call, but like we started with Windsurf and started crunching through, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go solve some problems. And I was like, and I focused my energy on Like, I feel like a lot of people pick up AI code and they say, I'm going to give it my current most difficult challenge. Look, it failed. AI is bad. And it's like, okay, no, I looked at the shit that nobody actually wants to do. I looked at the stuff that's like, what is the janitor work here? Like linting. Our linting stuff had gotten out of control. AI was getting really stuck because we had thousands and thousands of linting errors. Nobody in their right mind wanted to go work on it. And I was like, why don't we just make AI do this? That was like one of the
Yeah.
projects I tackled and just started giving AI prompts and just started pumping out uh, code and fixes across huge amounts of the code base to just start fixing these linting errors one by one. Everyone wanted the end result of the lint fix, but no one wanted to put the time in to do it. Um, and that was like my starting ground for like cutting my teeth on like exactly how to interface with an AI, exactly what context does it need, what are its limitations for where does it go too far, um, being comfortable with a solution that only works 80% of the time or 90% of the time and saying that's still valuable. It's not perfect, but it gets me somewhere. Um, that was like my starting ground.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I found this really inspiring because after our conversation last week, I started doing the same thing. I started contributing to our code base using AI, doing the things that no one really wants to do, but make a like demonstrable difference in the quality, look, feel, code, whatever of the product. And it's worked honestly, and it's been really interesting. But I think still a lot of people in this in our audience maybe come from an enterprise background. There's a lot of regulations and policies in place. Maybe their repos aren't set up for AI. So can you walk us through maybe first on like the infrastructure side, kind of how were you able to bring AI into Skydio with kind of the right like what infrastructure stack are you using, and
Yeah.
how are you able to do it in a way that was enterprise friendly, I suppose.
So if I had to rewind, I think I'll give a slightly different answer in that like the hard answer is like we introduced windsurf.
Yeah,
And someone's going to go like, wait a second, I'm in a regulated environment. I don't want to use an external vendor's like
yeah,
AI
yeah,
platformy thing, and it becomes a
exactly.
showstopper. But kind of rewind, fast forwarding into where I ended up, and if you read the blog post, you can kind of see how I went through my journey through just windsurf with one IDE, four IDEs at the same time, like each doing different tasks in the repo, eventually moving all the way over to full agentic AI. At the end of this, and where I think the winner is coming is like Claude and Anthropic continue with their laser focus on their product to build something excellent. And the really cool thing is with AWS Bedrock, we were able to just flip a switch and say, well, I got AWS Bedrock on. They're all the certifications and security compliance restraints that you could have. So if you're allowed to use AWS, so it's kind of like if you can use Coder at AWS, you can use Bedrock. You can ask your security team, can I just enable Bedrock integrations to my Coder instances? Flip that switch on. Now Cloud Code just works out of the gate, and it was really easy. And I didn't have to sign up and do a vendor analysis of Anthropic. I didn't have to set up API tokens for Anthropic, figure out
Yeah.
SSO for Anthropic. No, I just turned on AWS Bedrock. It's already part of my ecosystem. I am roles to get access to it, and poof, everyone's coder instance just magically had Cloud Code access. So that was how we introduced it in, and that was like super easy.
Okay. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And as far as the kind of developer environment, um, and the repo, I'd imagine no easy feat to get an AI agent to fix even something as simple as a linting error in a pretty large repo, right? How are you able to get
Yeah.
the proper context in place for an AI system to be able to do what it can in such a large environment? Because I think what we've heard from a lot of folks is that AI is great for vibe coding. Maybe it's good for making a new project, but it's not going to work with my existing code base. And you've kind of proved that wrong. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of how this has grown from just fixing linting errors. But yeah, what did you have to do on maybe the repo side or even on the coder side to make it so that agents can work more effectively here?
Well, we have an awesome leader here. His name's Vincent Lecroubier. He was the one that kind of, I don't know if on purpose or by accident, unlocked the key for. He started adding a context file into the root of the repo that said, "This is how this exact lint issue should be fixed." And it went from like adding that one thing to then basically you could immediately kind of see the impact that had across the linting errors because I was doing the linting stuff without that guidance, and
Mhm.
AI would create a slightly different solution every time that it didn't feel
Yeah.
good. So he added the first markdown file that was like, hey, for this subpath and this subrepository, this is what this lint error means. This is exactly how to fix it. He did a good example and a bad example, really starting to lean into, for anyone who's listening, AI is absolutely overwhelming right now. And there's all this prompt engineering and all this like terminology people throw at you. And it feels really scary from a distance. And then sometimes it boils down to people are like agents and sub agents and stuff. And then it ends up coming down to read a markdown file and you're like, could you just have led with that? It's like, yes, if you have a markdown file that has the guidance in it, the AI will do better. And it's like, oh, well, is the markdown file complicated? And the overall guidance, right, is make it so that a human could read it because the robots are trained to read off of material that humans write. So
Yeah,
therefore, yeah, you just write your code style guide down somewhere. So we just wrote a piece of our code style guide in Markdown in the Monorepo. And then all of a sudden, my AI started pumping out the correct solution, from 40% of the time to 90% of the time. And I went, oh shit, to solve the problem, we have a workflow now. So the workflow is, let's say there's some prompt that I wished worked. So this was something I did with starting to move into building features. I was like, I should be able to say this prompt and get a result. That's the outcome I would like to get to. So I saved that prompt and I said, I'm going to save this prompt forever. And I'm never going to actually merge the results of this prompt. So it was kind of a fake change, like rename the product into something silly, but I want to prove that some feature of that worked. In this case, it was like discovering how to navigate our front end code.
yeah,
So I started with that prompt, put it into the chat. Then as I followed along with the AI, the really cool part about how these people wrote AI bots is it explains the logic of what it did. And I noticed I used a terminology that the AI didn't understand. So it didn't know how to go from the code word I had used into the spot in the repo. And I went, okay, let's fix that first. So I added a little spot into the markdown file that says when people use this terminology, like one of these four words, it all means the same thing. It means go to this part of the sub part of the monorepo. Then I started up a fresh coder machine, put in the prompt again. So there was no context, no anything else. Fresh machine, give the prompt again. And I said, great. It figured out the terminology on the first try. I got to the correct subfolder. And I just kept repeating on that prompt. And every time it got stuck on something and it printed why it got stuck, I made another change to the markdown files and I kept working on that. And over time, I began building up kind of a library of prompts where I can say, like, hey, these prompts produce these results. Ideally, what I'd love to get to is to see a world where this is more formalized into actual testing frameworks that are produced. And maybe it's already there. I just don't personally know it. But it'd be awesome to get to the point where like Anthropic and stuff is putting out testing frameworks that are basically like, give me the prompt, give me the expected output that you would want from this. And then we can run regression tests such that as you change your markdown prompts, you can actually get a quantitative, like, all my old prompts still work and the new prompt works now. Let's merge this new context file. And I think there's a very real world here. And not to just drone on, but if at Skydio specifically, I'm giving this recommendation for everybody else, I kind of give the same thing. I think it's worth hiring someone whose job it is to build out that framework of prompts that should work for your business and say, start with a prompt of something you think is reasonable, assign someone to say your job is to keep putting this into a fresh coder instance over and over again until it produces the outcome that you want by making these changes to the repo. And it just takes time. But then once it's there, everybody else starts to be able to take great advantage of it. So that's where I think that's how you break into a mono repo is just a lot of elbow grease.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and I couldn't agree more that I think right now people are being using extremely complicated terms when it comes to like getting an agent to do something effective, whether it's something like context engineering or agents spinning up sub agents and like compression. Like there's just too much. And I think that what's been most effective for me working with agents is very similar to what you were saying. And this, you actually really inspired me to start doing this more, where it's like kick off an agent. It's going to fail. Keep kind of putting it in the right direction because you know kind of where it needs to go or where it's failing. Ask it to document what it's learned, and then all future, engineers who need to do something similar to that, their agents will follow a similar path, I suppose. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's super interesting. So, like, another question that we get a lot is kind of uh, around the culture of using AI, and I had kind of two questions here, and I'm curious like which way like you'll go with it. We've seen a lot of folks unsure where to start when it comes to what prompt do I enter, right? They're faced with this like empty box. They maybe ask it to do something, it doesn't do something, and they don't have that elbow grease or the time to keep reprompting it. Maybe there's things that it's really good at already, but they don't necessarily know about those things. So like some people just don't know where to start with it to get something effective. And then the second piece is more around kind of the pull request and the pull review culture, where we struggled with this early on at Coder, where some of our product managers or engineers would submit huge AI generated pull requests that are just too overwhelming to read. The quality of it's really bad, and it made it such that like people didn't want to spend their whole day reviewing pull request slop essentially. So really curious to hear kind of both how you've kind of navigated getting more people comfortable putting in that initial prompt and getting to the pull request, and then how those things actually end up ultimately getting shipped and delivered and merged and stuff.
Yeah, uh, I think they're kind of two very separate questions. On the first one, I don't have a good answer for that problem of, yeah, there is a giant empty prompt, and sometimes it really does feel a little like you're asking the wizard, with Wicked 2 outs, good timing, but you're like
Mhm.
asking the wizard like, what can you do? Because you really don't have a frame of reference for what's a realistic response, what's an
Yeah.
unrealistic response. Should I write 9 paragraphs of context or one sentence? And my honest feeling is like, this is one of those things in life where it's kind of like just jump on the surfboard and fall off moments. And that like, if if you're stopping yourself from trying because you're worried about falling off or what to do, then you're never going to get in there. So I think it's a very cheesy answer, but it's like to some degree, it's like you just have to have the tenacity to try it. If you're the type of person that doesn't like to try things that fail, this is not for you. Wait till somebody else paves it. But if you're someone who has the tenacity, then usually it's great if you have an outcome you need to meet that you can't meet without AI. So a lot of really cool AI development at Skydio wasn't just pioneered by me. There was another woman here, Maddie Johnson, who she went out and built AI because that was the only vector she had to solve her team's problems. And again, that tenacity to say, I'm going to solve this problem no matter what, really helped get over that hurdle. But yeah, okay. Tossing aside the what do you do if we don't know what to do, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
Um, sorry, the other question, can you repeat
The
that?
other question is on kind of pull request culture. Yeah, I got
Yes.
excited, so I asked you two very different questions at once. Pull request culture. So
Yeah.
we've run into issues in the past at Coder. We've heard the same with some of our customers where they introduce an AI tool, and all of a sudden these huge pull requests are getting submitted where the developer didn't necessarily review the code themselves. It's really challenging to review, and it's just essentially AI slop, right?
Yep.
How are you dealing with that at Skydio, and how are you kind of um, getting AI generated pull requests reviewed and actually merged into your rather complex code base?
Yeah. So um, I haven't thought through this answer entirely, so it's possible someone's going to find like a really good flaw why that doesn't work for their use case. But the thing that kind of comes to mind to me a little bit is we started with using AI to try to solve problems that nobody wanted to solve that were from engineering itself. So linting was a really good one. There was also another one of like we had a backlog of just UI jank. Everyone's probably got a jank button of,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm aware if you shrink the page, the entire thing looks like garbage, but I'm busy and JavaScript is a terrible language for terrible people. But like, um, so people are like, I'm too busy to solve that trivial problem. I have to solve the thing that only I can solve. I know the product doesn't look good. I feel bad about it. So I went through and said, you know what I'm going to do? I don't know JavaScript at all, but I'm going to ask AI repeatedly. And I set up the Playwright MCP, and it's a good introduction to how do you start adding into your AI stuff without getting overwhelmed. Is I was like, man, I really need a way to give it a screenshot or let it look at the browser and see the effect it has on its
Yeah.
own UI. So I introduced a Playwright MCP. Again, it turns out that was just 3 lines of configuration code. It wasn't hard. It just everyone made it sound complicated, and it wasn't. So
Yeah.
I got it set up, and then I was like, "Hey AI, I want you to try looking at this janky button when this thing happens." And I gave it that thing. The first result that came back, it did something like, yes, I deleted the page. Your bug is gone. And I'm like, technically, you're correct. You've introduced a new problem, but you did fix it. So then I told it, you're a bad person, AI. You should feel bad. Try again. That's when I spun up a second windsurf and I tried the same thing there. And I tried a third thing. Pretty soon I had 3 computers going at the same time on this really gnarly bug that 2 senior software engineers had both bailed on and said, I don't know how to fix this. It's not worth my time. So I had 3 computers doing it. And eventually one of them got it. Um, and it came out as like not a complex amount of line of code. And I submitted that in. And so from the developer's perspective, they got a pull request for something they've always wanted fixed, but didn't want to spend the time on. So it kind of started the tone, again, first impressions. It started the tone with AI can solve problems that I don't have time for.
Yeah.
Later, we introduced non-developers producing pull requests worth of code that again, not reviewed. Some of them were AI slop for sure, but we didn't start that way. We started getting the hearts and minds of developers to say, yes, AI actually can, and agentic AI specifically, can actually solve problems that I really wanted to have solved. And a lot of the attitude, and this is going to carry over to the AI slop, was we set a tone of, I I didn't write the code. If you want to just -1 and close the pull request, works for me. Like I don't have any like it's not like this is like my baby where I'm going to get emotionally hurt about it. Whereas in a lot of pull requests, when someone builds it by hand, there's a lot of identity associated with it, such that if you shit on their pull request or close it out, you could get a negative reaction. But AI stuff, it's way easier just to say like, "Hey, this isn't the right solution," and I would just go, "No problem. I'll move on to a different bug. I gave it a shot. I tried. I'll just move on." Um, and so we set a tone across engineering where if someone gives you bad code, you just have to you can just say no. The answer is no. We also then told all the developers that the reality of the future is with AI generated code, your job is going to shift to a higher percentage of code reviewing than writing code. That is the reality of what's happening. And if you can't accept that, you're not going to survive in software. Reviewing code, and this is a pretty good call out to anyone here who works at a dev prod company. We don't have the tooling available as managers to reward people for good code reviews. So your compensation and your annual reviews are heavily biased towards the features that you wrote or maybe the
Mm.
bugs that you fixed. But if you're an excellent code reviewer, I have no way of saying, look how many great comments you make and how many changes were the result of your comments. That there's no feedback cycle there. We should work on that as a community. And for people who build dev prod tools, that is a thing we need to survive this new AI code slop world, is something that rewards people for code reviewing such that you feel like code reviewing is a good use of your time that you will get rewarded for.
Yeah. I really like your approach of first starting with things that engineers don't want to do but get a lot of value and pride in having in the code base, such as fixing a linting error or fixing a UI bug that everyone's aware of but no one wants to deal with, versus trying to do things that you know we talk a lot about, like, is is AI going to replace software engineering? And I think like any type of executive led strategy that has that undertone to it, it's going to be really challenging to build any type of AI culture in engineering, right? Because it seems like it seems very hostile from the beginning. So really like that. I also like that it's balanced with kind of a strategy of this isn't something that we can completely ignore, and it is going to have an impact on people's careers. You need to become more of a reviewer, and I think it's a good call out too. As an industry, we need to get better at thinking about ways to measure and reward people based on their reviews and stuff. You were also talking about spinning up three different instances at once, trying to fix this issue. And there's a question from the audience that I think is somewhat related to this, which is how do you to spin up all of these agents in the first place, to work on these, and then how do you clean up these agents that are maybe doing the wrong thing, or are old or did like a false start essentially. So yeah, how are you managing
Yeah.
so many agents at once, and how are you cleaning up all of the work that we're essentially just discarding?
Well, I got to rewind to the past and no, this isn't a Coder advertisement, but this is a reason I am a big fan of Coder. I wouldn't be on this podcast if I wasn't a fan, because the work that I did several years ago to make it so that on a per pull request basis, I have my own workstation paid off here because the model ends up becoming I spin up a Coder workstation dedicated to a pull request. I prompt that AI agent. That AI agent only has the context of this one pull request and it's in a clean working environment within minutes. It's executing and running across its stuff. I'm checking in with it, bouncing it more things back and forth. And then when I had an issue with another coder agent, I just spun up another coder workstation. And then I gave that coder workstation, I picked a different AI model and I gave it a slightly different prompt and I kicked them both off. When one of them was too far down the dark path, I flushed it down the toilet and said, nope, you're out. And I started another coder workspace. And that ephemerality of workstations is so unique to cloud-based development environments. This idea of like in a given day, I could have 12 or 15 workstations all working at different on different things. Some of them shut down, waiting for the pull request to merge, some of them in progress. But it was mentally easy for me to keep track of them when I thought about them as each workstation as a task that is
Yeah.
trying to accomplish something for me. And then I can, when that task is complete, I will delete that instance. And I'm not dealing with Git branches. I don't have to worry about two AI agents. Like the problem is, if you have two AI agents on the same computer writing into the same code base, you can't separate that. We have a monorepo. I can't have five copies of the monorepo that the like
Yeah.
in the same instance without like going absolutely insane. So the coder workstations was like, oh, this is a perfect solution. I will do that. And then later coder formalized that into coder tasks, where the idea is you can start with the prompt and wait to see the results. So I don't know if there's a spoiler alert or whatever, but we started leveraging coder tasks where the idea is I could start with the prompt. I don't have to worry about that 6 minutes of boot up time because I've already context switched somewhere else. So I type in the prompt, I let the workstation boot up, and then I wait for either a pull request to get delivered or the agent to come back and say that it failed being a robot. And that flow is kind of the flow I started using of I will take a prompt. And one last callback, sorry to drone on, but one last callback to the question of like massive pull requests. One of the issues I had, I wanted to migrate our entire front end off an old library to a new library. What an awful, awful task. Like, I want this button to look exactly the same, but use a different framework so I can discard the old framework. And anyone here who's
Yeah.
worked in JavaScript has done a migration off of some JavaScript framework. It is awful, and no one has wanted to do it. So I used coder tasks for that. But the way I avoided the AI slop was to say, you know what? I'm going to have each coder task generate a pull request for a single file owned by a single person. And I could say, yeah, but not literal single person, but I knew who the on calls were. So I would say, great, I've handed you a pull request that is changing a single button. So at the end result, the workflow would be give the prompt to the coder task. The coder task kicks off a coder workstation. The coder workstation goes to work on it. The text I gave it told it to work on a single file and make a pull request. The pull request goes up to GitHub. We use Chromatic and Vercel, so we get a bunch of tests in place. But more importantly, we get the preview stack that's running off of that. So then the code reviewer just goes, you changed a single button. Okay, I'll open up the preview. Look, the button is where it's supposed to be according to Chromatic, and it functionally works. So I'm okay putting a +1 on this code. And so doing it that way meant that I could put out hundreds of pull requests in a day. And just think about that, like 100 pull requests in a day. Like I could just sit there and start chipping these things out. And each person reviewing it wasn't committing to reviewing a ton of stuff. Now, as a human doing this, you could imagine trying to create 100 Git branches on the same machine. You drive yourself crazy, keeping track of all those different pieces. But I just labeled each each workstation off of what the pull task was meant for type of idea. And then from there, I was able to just start sharding out a ton of work, and everything was bite sized. Everything I did that when I started doing those AI slop giant pull requests, people were like, no.
Yeah.
And they would spend forever to review it because they didn't want to be responsible. One last comment on that, which is the interesting problem of one of the reasons why developers are so afraid of AI slop or other people's changes is because at the end of the day, the developer is probably the one on call for
Yeah.
if that code breaks in production, not the person who's AI slopping it in. So therefore, the developer is taking over their responsibility to cancel their date night or their anniversary with, their wife or something to go respond to this incident. And so there's a little bit of this responsibility saying, I don't know if the person who wrote this actually understood any of it. So now I have to go understand it because I can't just assume that they're smart. They probably thought of this. So that's where that hesitancy comes from.
Yeah. And I think we saw a question that we actually kind of already answered, which is like for these examples, no one's going to produce a PR, no one's going to review a thing with thousands of lines of code. So how can you kind of create smaller targeted PRs? And I think you nailed it. One thing I'll comment on, because I'm also seeing like a question about how specifically these workspaces and instances are shut down. We are building coder tasks to be much more API and event driven. So we want to encourage people to use the API or some other automation mechanism, maybe the CLI and the CI or something, to spin off these things in a pretty ephemeral nature. And then we want Coder as a platform to be able to both kind of sleep these sessions when there's no activity, so that the compute is no longer running, and then also shut them down when like maybe the pull request is closed or time a period has done. So it's not perfect today. We have a scheduling mechanism where if a workspace isn't active for a configurable period of time, maybe after 5 hours or something, the workspace shuts down. Then we have another configuration knob where, after a week the workspace is deleted, so everything's removed. We want that to be more controllable so that agent stopped working, the workspace can sleep, and then agent gets another message, it's kind of resumed and the compute is saved. So we want that cleanup mechanism to become better, but that's kind of it, we already have the APIs in place to do things like that.
Yeah, I
um,
think there's like an interesting set of questions. So like I'm seeing some questions in the chat here, and there's an interesting thought I had, which was like, there are people who aren't using I've talked to some people who don't use AI at all, or that's becoming a less and less small set. But especially when it started, there were people that were hesitant to doing some of these AI things because they had all these things that they had created in their mind as blockers to even get started. They're like, what if the AI agent went out of control and built 20 other machines and then everything started to go crazy? And kind of my thought is like, okay, are you at the point today that you use agentic AI in a one-to-one setting today? If you're not, start there. Like the other stuff is scary, but
yeah,
you don't have to start
yeah,
there. You can start at just, I use AI to make code faster. I give AI to people who need to work cross department and work on other people's code. So at Skydio in particular, the place where AI is really good is you have drone developers making TypeScript changes, or cloud developer or Kubernetes developers making front end changes, or front end engineers making back end changes, and you get people working very cross stream where they didn't used to before, and it's providing value. So I would anchor your business on, if you're successfully leverage AI in its simple way, because it provides value. You don't need the complexity to provide any value. And I think once you're there, there's a lot more like, okay, I'm aware of what could happen. If I gave the coding agent the ability to spin up more workstations, it'd be a problem. Okay, well, where's the guards for that? Well, there's a
yeah,
guard in Coder where you can lock down how many workstations can get spun up per user. So you could start to twiddle that knob. Like there are plenty of things you can do. And I think it's just a question of, if you're coming from a place of, I already believe and use this effectively and I just need to advance to the next step, versus I'm not willing, don't prevent entering the pipeline because you don't know how you're going to safeguard the end of it.
yeah. I think it's a really good point where um it's easy for things to get really complicated in your head until you start using these tools and realizing it's a lot more simple. I remember like specifically around agent security, this is something that I spent a lot of time kind of getting, my head wrapped up in. I'm like, well, what if agents are spinning up agents? How do you secure those? How do you secure the MCP supply chain? Da, 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 da. And then kind of ultimately came to the conclusion through some other people's writing who spent a lot more time with AI than I have, that the best way to secure an agent is by restricting the network access that it has, so that it can't go and exfiltrate your source code. If it's within your
Yeah.
network, it's a lot more secure. And then you reduce the permissions, and like there's a basic set of things that you can do, and it will come pretty natural to you after you start using these tools to kind of map out what a threat model looks like in reality versus
Yeah.
kind of the hype around like multi-agent systems is something that I think is extremely overhyped. People talk about agents talking to agents, and then these swarms and stuff. And I think there's ways to do some things where an agent can spin off a smaller agent to do research and then compress that. I think that's fine, right? Like, and I think that stuff's important, but like
Yeah.
the reality of how this stuff is useful is very different than people who are claiming they have teams of agents working for them, and that's the future. It's just, I mean, with different personas and stuff. I think it's really important to get hands on with these tools and figure out what they're capable of.
A lot of the way I do things is like, I came up with something that would provide some value, and I did 100 times in a row before I introduced the next technology. I
Yeah,
hate technology bloat. I would not put someone at your business that is like a technology bloat person who just keeps scooping in more technology into the pool, and like immediately. Like I think if you drive AI from a very practical standpoint, going back to that prompt thing of saying, I have an outcome I want. This prompt should have produced a result. So that's how we introduced subagents. And again, subagents are just like separate markdown files. But like we introduced this concept of subagents by saying, I have a prompt that isn't working. And I think it's not working because the context of a single agent and how it's flowing isn't working. And so we started with a prompt and we added a sub agent and showed that with the introduction of this second markdown file, we had a better result as a thing. And that's again where it's like, hey, anyone from Anthropic listening, I think formalizing a testing framework for prompt engineering is going to be a huge value add. And again, if anyone in this chat is like, dude, you're an idiot, here's the GitHub repo that does this, please link it into the chat, because that is, I think, the next real advancement I need is something where I can say, if I changed a bunch of agent markdown files, how do I know that all of the prompts that used to work still work and I didn't accidentally cause a regression? So that's where agent to agent starts to become interesting, is that I do want to create an agent that launches coder tasks
Yeah.
to give them preset prompts to then validate the results of their pull request. And it's like, oh
Yeah.
boy, we are entering Alice's Wonderland.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess that's where multi-agent starts becoming interesting, is kind of testing the, yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, cool. Well, you hinted at this a little bit, which was you started by introducing you know, agents to developers and working on solving problems that developers are running into every day around like the linting and stuff. But then you also hinted at product managers or infrastructure people also beginning to contribute code. Can you walk us through kind of how that graduation occurred and how you're seeing AI used more widely beyond just software engineers specifically, whose job is to ship
Yeah.
to the product, and kind of what where there was friction, or maybe where you were surprised there wasn't as much friction.
There's an engineer on my team, Holt Wilkins. He is absolutely super smart and incredible developer who, or rather, he came from an SRE, statistical DevOps background, doing a lot more like make the cloud work, make the infrastructure work, write the bash scripts or the Ansible scripts or the
Mm-hmm.
Puppet scripts and things to get something to go through. But he's accrued over his career a significant amount of deep expertise. And so, you're a fresh college grad who knows how to write some Python, and maybe you know how to write Python better than he does. But if I asked you to spin up a Kubernetes cluster that has like an Elastic Cache and RDS and some S3s, and I want you to set up, a WAF firewall, network segregation, all this other stuff, you'd be like, huh? But this is something that he does professionally, and that's very valuable. And it's that last mile of some of that Python code that was slow enough of a like, I don't know this code base. Like I could figure it out if I wrote all of it, but I didn't write this code base. So I watched as like he in particular is my favorite example because as AI started getting introduced to his world, he started going further and further into the stack to say, I can make a substantive change to the entire ecosystem and I can wire it up myself. I can now write the backend calls that use it. I can then write the front end calls. And that's always been a curse for infrastructure engineers is we have so much knowledge about how to make the world work better, but JavaScript is usually not one of them at the front end. And so therefore the way that people interface with our systems is like, hey, look, I've got this CLI for you. And someone's like, that's I'm not in a place where that's the easiest mechanism for me. So watching these infrastructure engineers crawl up the stack and start getting to the point of like saying, taking all their wealth of knowledge and then adding that last mile addition of I put the button on the screen that does the work has been transformative. So for our product itself now, we're seeing all the infrastructure engineers actually going through and actually just submitting code to the product all the way up and down the line, all the way up to the front end. And we're seeing a ton of features come out that normally would have been a handoff between one of the teams working on the infrastructure and another team doing the connection between them. And now the ability to just end to end do the whole thing is game changing. And again, that doesn't mean that all infrastructure engineers will replace all engineers. I'm just simply saying that glue between saying, man, 90% of the work was in this hard stuff, and I had this 10% that I needed to do over here. An example I could think of was we wanted a multi-part 5 GB data uploader, which meant using the AWS SDK and TypeScript.
Mm.
Well, the engineer knows AWS, they know S3, they know all the SDKs. Knowing TypeScript is the hard part. And so, oh, well, I could just AI vibe code up that last mile part where I already got the infrastructure doing what I need. And that was a massive value add for us to be able to handle multi-part uploads of greater than 5 GB files was a massive feature unblocker. So that's how infrastructure engineers are going up. Our PMs, and maybe this is Skydio specific, but there's a lot of stuff at Skydio when you come to drones and aeronautics that are deep levels of expertise. Again, harkening back to the infrastructure engineer, our wireless PM has been working in this field for decades and accrued a ton of knowledge that is very difficult to learn. And with that knowledge, he knows exactly what an interface could look like that would be great. Translating that from his brain to everybody else can be harder. But also like by just unblocking him and saying you can now vibe code and change the front end to surface data. And we're starting to see a thing where it's like, okay, well, the backend developer makes sure that all the data is available in the query, and the PM can then go through and make the user interface work based on that data and use that knowledge. So where I see a lot of value coming in the future is in any industry where it takes 10 or 15 years of experience to learn some deep, deep engineering problems like wireless connectivity is a really difficult and complicated problem. If you then empower those people can now vibe code up that last minute mile stuff, you get some amazing outcomes that would otherwise have been very difficult to do.
Yeah, I really like the idea of kind of the last mile in this case, where these folks are extremely knowledgeable. They're really like big knowledge holders. It's not that AI is replacing what they're good at. It's actually just taking the part that's relatively easy from a coding standpoint and making that available. Um,
Yeah.
I um I wanted to kind of chat about like what would Skydio look like today if you didn't have these capabilities in these ephemeral environments? Would this work be? I think in some cases, like would the work be done at all? Would it just take a lot longer? Like when it comes to actually the actual impact on the organization and maybe the culture overall, what kind of how do you think things would be different if there wasn't AI in the picture today?
I think there's raw statistics we have like a 30%, 40% increase in pull requests merged overall. Like, so there's some raw practical, like obviously it had some big impacts.
Yeah.
But qualitatively, I think the answer is the features wouldn't have gotten done. We wouldn't have translated the front end framework. We wouldn't have built those new front ends. We wouldn't have built those uploaders because in the raw, like if you're a big, I'm a big believer in Conway's law, and a lot of the big believers in just people are a big problem. So if you have a scene where you have like an infrastructure team that has an infrastructure lead, and now you have a software team and a software lead, and those report to two different department heads, and the infrastructure team needs the software team to build something that empowers their feature, but the software team, the incentive structures end up being the question is, it's just the raw fact of like people are more incentivized to work in their lane, and it's difficult. And I've never seen this to be like magically solved. It is difficult to um, uh, communicate across these streams and have a perfect optimum system. Like if you had a crystal ball of perfect knowledge, you could go to someone else and say, I have crystal balled up that you pausing your work for the day and doing my front end is actually the correct use of your time. And the person could go, awesome, your crystal ball is perfect. So therefore I will pivot what I'm doing to come support you. But the
Yeah.
reality is you have this more qualitative, I believe you should help me. And the other person's like, oh, I don't know if I feel the same way. Um, and so with AI being able to deliver that last minute mile kind of solves that problem if we don't have a crystal ball and we seamless handoffs between teams are just not a thing. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. We've spoken with some security leaders who have to spend a ton of time without their crystal balls convincing engineering teams to help like with security patches, right? And vulnerability patches. And it's the stuff that developers don't really want to do. So I totally see how AI makes it easier for folks like outside of, the software engineering organization to begin to help offload what developers don't want to do anyway, kind of getting out of their way. Well, it's still kind of not get shipping in a way that they wouldn't before. So that totally makes sense. Um,
I, I think it's been a very transformative, and we've been very careful here to say that the answer is not we're going to let anyone go over AI. Our whole thing has been people want to work here and they want to build the features, and saying, well, AI will help you build more of the features you wanted to build anyway faster makes it awesome. And being very careful, like maybe it will slow down our headcount. Maybe we will spend more money on GPU and we'll hire one less person as a result. But that's not the message we're trying to lean into people. We're trying to lean into the message you love building cool drone features. You get to build more cool drone features
yeah,
here.
yeah. Let's focus more on building what we like. Now I'm kind of asking you to pull up a crystal ball. What's next, I guess, for Skydio? Where are you looking to kind of grow when it comes to the way that you're implementing ephemeral workspaces, AI, everything into the platform? And if this is something that you would like to see in Coder change as well, that's absolutely fine too. I'm just curious where you see this going and where you'd like to take things.
Yeah, I think our core thing is we need to hire, in case anyone's looking for a job. We're looking to hire people who want to make their job at building out these AI workflows and helping people. And so I want to look at hiring an AI embedded engineer whose job is to try to work on those prompts for the embedded engineering and kernel development team, and one for the autonomy team, and one for the cloud teams, and work on saying, okay, dev prod, your new job is to include people whose job it is to do prompt engineering as a full-time career and making that glue happen. So sure, there's small paper cuts and stuff, but I think our my big vision is that we should shift to having more things automated and have better tooling. And I think there's a very ripe ecosystem for people saying, hey, give me the prompt that you wished worked that failed miserably, and I will go work on the prompt engineering until that is now successful.
That makes a ton of sense. So, if anything, more of a kind of headcount investment in folks who are comfortable with taking and using AI to get it to something great. Cool. Well, Elliot, this was awesome. We are at time, so really appreciate everyone who has asked us questions. If not, you can reach us at coder.com/contact. My name is Ben at coder.com. I'm sure you can find Elliot on LinkedIn too. Would love to hear from you. This was an awesome webinar. Elliot, thank you. This was really inspiring. It's changed the way that I've thought about how I can kind of lead by example too, in kind of my job and what I'm doing. So really appreciate it. And this was great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ben.
Cool. Take
Appreciate
care.
it.